Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he was sorry for not recusing himself in the We Charity fiasco. Finance Minister Bill Morneau did the very same thing. Brian Lilley joins me now once again from Toronto, one of our regular contributors. Brian, walk me through the connections between the Liberals and We and why it matters that they were caught with their hands in the cookie jar.
Yeah, well, and all these apologies, I'm starting to think the theme song for Trudeau's Liberal government right now might be the Patsy Cline classic, I'm sorry. I won't sing it for you. I won't do that to your ears, but he was very, very sorry this week for not recusing himself. And the reason that that's important, both for Trudeau and for Morneau, as well as his chief of staff and his natural resources minister, who are all part of giving this $912 million sole source contract to We, the charity, is that they all have close ties. So this part of the problem is not about We, it's about the government. The federal government is supposed to put out for tender any contract above $25,000. If it's below $25,000 and I'm like, Hal, you're a great guy. I like working with you all the time. I need this done and I know you can do it. I can give you a contract for $24,999. But that has to include HST.
Oh.
But if it's above $25,000, it has to go to tender. They didn't put it to tender. Now, Justin Trudeau's mother, brother, and wife have all been paid to work at We Events. Justin Trudeau has a very tight, intimate relationship with Craig and Mark Kielburger, the founders of We. And he's been very close to the organization. He's spoken at their first We event in 2007, in 2008, in 2012, 15, 16, 17, and I think maybe 2018. Bill Morneau has a daughter who currently works for We. The whole family's been on trips with the organization that, the Morneau family did pay for themselves. And Katie Telford, Trudeau's chief of staff, and his natural resources minister, Seamus O'Regan, started a charity to raise money for We to pay for arts programming at We schools in places like Kenya and Ecuador. So this is a government very close to We. So turning around and saying to them, hey, let's give these guys over here, our friends, a $912 million contract, that's problematic on its own. But none of them put their hands up and said, you know what, I can't take part in this, I'm too close. That's what you're supposed to do to avoid conflict of interest. They didn't do it, and therefore, it looks like the Prime Minister is being too cozy with his friends, with your money, by the way.
Now, last Friday, we learned that We had in fact paid the PM's mother, Margaret Trudeau, to speak at We events. Now we find out she spoke at a big Canada 150 We Day on Parliament Hill, where the feds chipped in money, and the PM's mother was actually paid there.
Yeah, so that makes it even cozier, is that the federal government is giving money for this event. It was July 2nd, 2017. You might remember the stories about the disastrous Canada 150 on the Hill. It was raining. Bono and the Edge from U2 came out briefly. They couldn't get people on the hill due to the security they put up there. I've been up there for countless events, including several Canada Day concerts, and it's normally seamless, but this one was a disaster. Well, the next day they left everything in place. That very expensive stage, I'm sure you remember, it takes weeks for the civil servants to put that up, Hal. It's very expensive. They just gave all of that equipment and infrastructure to We, plus they gave them $1 million. And then that is one of the 28, I believe it's 28 events that Margaret Trudeau spoke at for We, while she was earning her $312,000 from them. The feds put in more than $1 million to this event, plus all the in-kind infrastructure donations. So it just makes it all that more cozy, all the more reason the PM should have said, I'm not in on this one, guys. I'm going to step aside. You make the decision.
Now, the opposition parties have been saying the government made a huge mistake here because they could have used an existing program. Brian, would potentially using this summer jobs program have worked out a little bit better?
Oh, for everyone involved. Look, the Prime Minister's got headaches from this. He's probably going to take a bit of a hit in the polls. Ethics scandals may not bring a government down, but it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. And anyone that thinks SNC-Lavalin and the Aga Khan Island trip didn't hurt him, well, just look at the last election. He went from majority to minority, and he barely scraped his way into government, skin of the teeth sort of thing. So another one of these where the ethics commissioner, I don't know how Mario Dion, the ethics commissioner, does not find the Prime Minister guilty. Well, that's going to ding on the Prime Minister. We is facing more scrutiny than they ever have. And the people waiting on this money from this summer grant thing, Well, they're still waiting because it's been delayed. The Canada Summer Jobs Program has been around for decades. It was around when I was coming out of high school and looking for a summer job. It's a good program. It works. Guess what it does, Hal? It matches people with job experience and gives money to the employer to allow the student to do it. It's very similar. Now, the claim is, well, this was supposed to be for volunteer. Well, if you're getting paid, it's not volunteer. And if you're going to get up to $5,000, between 1,000 and 5,000, guess what? The average is about 3,500 with Canada's Summer Jobs Program. This could have put money in people's pockets, no headaches for the PM, no headaches for we, and nothing for journalists to talk about in the summer. But people would have, it just would have happened, and they didn't do that.
Now, Brian, you've collected a lot of information on We and their affiliated organizations, from who pays for what, who profits, what kind of real estate they hold. What did you find out?
Well, I started to look into this because, of course, one of the things you do when you're investigating any sort of group is say, okay, where's the money? I was off the week that the whole We scandal, fiasco, whatever you want to call it, broke. And so I was coming into it late. I tried to stay out of the news. And then I'm looking and I said, let's look at their financials. Now, with a charity, what you're often looking for is, do they pay too much for administration? Are a lot of people getting really high salaries and not a lot of money going to the intended cause? That's not the case. I did not find that at all with We. But there was one line that said their land and building holdings in Canada totaled $43.7 million. And I think we talked about how when I first asked about that, I heard from their defamation lawyer. Well, I didn't get much more information out of We over the last week. What I mostly got was, it's all on the public record. Go look it up. So I did. And along the way, I found that what I'm calling Kielburger Inc., which isn't a company, but it's the collection of charities, companies, not-for-profits, foundations that are all centered around Craig and Mark Kielburger. They own an entire block of real estate on Queen Street East, not far from downtown Toronto. They own this historic building that is the We Global Learning Center, but they own the rest of the block as well, several houses just south of that down the side street, and several buildings across the street. To me, this looks like they're amassing something to do a big redevelopment. And in fact, they've talked about wanting to redevelop. They haven't been all that clear with their plans on what it will be, but they have said they're looking to redevelop the land. Is that really what you're looking to do with charity money when you're donating to charity? I know some of this was specifically, people said, I'll give you $5 million to build this We Global Learning Center. But what about all the other buildings? And some of them are owned by We Charity. Some are owned by a group called Imagine One Day International, which is a charity that We has effectively taken over. The Me to We Asset Holdings Inc., which is a holding company for the Me to We private company that the brothers own. And then there's a Me to We Foundation. So we've got 4 different groups, all centered around the Kielburgers and owning 15 different parcels of land in this one block.
Brian, more of the country is opening up from COVID-19. Now, you looked at coronavirus deaths across the country and how provincial authorities counted deaths. It turns out you don't need to die from COVID to actually die from COVID. Can you explain?
Yeah, sometimes you're dying with COVID, but not from it. And, so I started investigating this after a tweet from Toronto Public Health where they said, yes, people who die with COVID, but not from it, are included in our death count. And I thought, well, that's interesting. We've all talked about that. We've all heard anecdotally from someone who had a relative who had many different underlying conditions, and they died and it was put down as a COVID death. Well, they maybe had cancer and they maybe had a heart condition and lots of other things, but they're listed as a COVID death. So I looked to see what it was like in Ontario, and then I said, well, what about the rest of the country? And I just tried to look at the provinces that matter, because there's no sense asking New Brunswick, they have 2 deaths, doesn't really make a statistical difference. But every other province that I talked to, British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, all do this in one way or another. There's slight variations, and where you are in Alberta, they'll count you as a COVID death if you've got COVID when you die. Now, if they find out that there's another reason that you died that is clearly explainable, then they will remove you. And they've removed 5 people from the rolls, but Alberta is the only province that does that. There are, valid reasons for why they would count you, such as an Ontario study showed 36% of all people who died with COVID had an underlying condition. And the most common one in more than half of them was heart disease. Well, COVID puts incredible strain on your heart. So you may have had a heart attack, but you wouldn't have had the heart attack without COVID. So, there are people on both sides trying to grab this and say, aha, told you COVID was a hoax, and they're inflating the numbers to scare us all. That's not the case. And I've got others saying, well, you just want people to die, and that's why you're telling us this. No, what I want is real clear data. And that's what we don't have in Canada, unfortunately. Health officials have been, working under incredible pressure throughout all of this, but we do need to look at our reporting system and our data going forward.
Despite some serious pushback from our allies, Huawei is still hopeful they can be part of Canada's 5G system. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, they are doing an all-out push, and full disclosure, the story that came out on this, I think it was from the Canadian Press. It cites a friend of mine, someone I've known and worked with for years, and who I see socially here in Toronto, Ali Velshi, used to be with the Harper government. Now he works with Huawei. He still talks to me, even though I constantly write about why Huawei shouldn't be in 5G and we shouldn't deal with the company. But they're hopeful that the Trudeau government sees it a different way. I'm not sure how they do at this point. Canadian public opinion has really turned against Huawei and against China over the kidnapping of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Huawei has, spent a lot of money helping fund research at universities. They've done a lot in terms of trying to help rural and remote communities get decent cell service, including in Canada's far north. But as far as letting them in the middle of everything that's going on between Canada and China, I think it's very difficult. I mean, there's even talk now that TikTok, which is a Chinese app, that if you've got it on a company or a government phone, you should be deleting it, and not using that social media because there are security risks. So the Trudeau government's going to be in tough to follow through on this, but that's not stopping Huawei from doing their major charm offensive.
Now, Conservative leadership hopeful Erin O'Toole released his policy on China this week. And now, Brian, you're calling this the most well-thought-out China policy yet from the candidates.
Yeah, not all of them have released full policies. They all have, by the way. Peter MacKay, Erin O'Toole, Derek Sloan, Leslyn Lewis, they've all said that they will ban Huawei from Canada's 5G, and they've all made statements to one degree or another talking about a need to reset Canada's relationship. But O'Toole takes it a step further in laying out a plan. Now, the others may come out with something similar, but they haven't yet. He looks at everything from the trade warfare that Canada has been facing from China to Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor getting them back. He says, if you give an ultimatum to China, you got 30 days to release them, send them back to Canada, or we're going to start imposing economic sanctions and Magnitsky Act type sanctions on your officials. And that would be very uncomfortable for China. And on top of that, there's this discussion about working with the United States, with Australia, Britain, and other allies, South Korea and Japan, to lessen China's dominance in economic affairs, especially things like supply chain. We've all seen that during COVID-19, the inability to get personal protective equipment here to Canada because of bottlenecks or sometimes outright corruption in China. So it's an interesting plan. By the way, I'm not endorsing Erin O'Toole. I don't believe I'll be endorsing anyone in the Conservative leadership campaign, but I will be writing about it when they come out with interesting proposals.
And a program note as well for our viewers. When you're watching BCN at home, we'll have Erin O'Toole on our program next week. Now, Brian, a federal audit says we lost close to 35,000 people ordered deported, including nearly 3,000 listed as criminals.
Yeah, this is a bit of a disturbing report, and we've seen similar ones in the past, but not with numbers quite this high. So 34,700 people were ordered removed from Canada, deported in one way or another. Now we tend to favor voluntary deportations. It's cheaper, it's less cumbersome, but not everyone follows the rules. And apparently, without a lot of enforcement, 34,700 people decided not to follow the rules. Most of them were rejected because they had, might have been a false claim. They might have claimed refugee status, but they didn't qualify. For various reasons, they were ordered out. But just shy of 3,000 were ordered out because of criminal activity, either in Canada or in their home country before they came here. And then we find out about it wherever the criminal activity happened. And we said, no, we're not having you. We can't find these people. Now, they may actually have gone home, but they very much are likely living in Canada under the radar. There have been calls in the past for this to be cleaned up. The Harper government was told by a similar audit in 2012 that there was a problem with voluntary deportations. So they started to do a bit more enforcement. That went away under the Trudeau Liberals. Now it looks like they'll have to go back to it. There's even talk that they might want to start saying to people, okay, you're being deported. Here's $800 to buy your ticket. Now get out. Some other countries have tried this and found it more successful. And it's a lot cheaper than sending 2 officers to your door, arresting you, and forcing you on a plane. So while it may seem odd, it may actually work and save us money in the end.
Political reporter Brian Lilley joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you.